On the morning of February 9th, 1855, residents across parts of Devon, England woke to something unusual in the snow. During the night, temperatures had dropped and a layer of snow had covered the countryside. But by morning, people in several towns and villages began reporting the same thing. Footprints, thousands of them. They appeared in gardens, across fields, beside houses, and along narrow country roads. At first, there was nothing particularly alarming about that. Animals leave tracks in snow all the time. But these prints didn't immediately resemble the normal tracks residents expected to find. They appeared almost hoof-shaped. And according to some contemporary descriptions, they formed remarkably straight, single-file trails. Within days, reports of the footprints began spreading beyond Devon. Newspapers picked up the story. Naturalists attempted to explain them. Residents followed the trails looking for whatever had made them. And before long, the strange marks acquired a name that would remain attached to the incident for more than 170 years: the Devil's Footprints. The main incident appears to have occurred during the night of February 8th into the morning of February 9th. Reports came from communities around the Exe Estuary and elsewhere in East and South Devon: Exmouth, Topsham, Limpstone, Dawlish, and several surrounding areas. The descriptions were not always identical. That's important. Some witnesses described marks resembling a small donkey's hoof. Others reported different shapes, but one particular account would eventually become the most famous. It described impressions approximately 4 inches long and less than 3 inches wide. The prints appeared one after another, not side by side, single file, as if whatever made them had placed one foot directly in front of the other. The distance between some of the impressions was reported to be only around 8 inches. And the trail appeared to continue for an extraordinary distance. By February 16th, the Times was reporting on the mysterious tracks. Then, on February 24th, the Illustrated London News published a much more detailed account. It even included an illustration showing what the prints supposedly looked like. This is one of the reasons the incident is so difficult to dismiss as a modern internet legend. The story wasn't created decades later. People were discussing it in February 1855, and some were genuinely struggling to identify what had made the marks. But the shape of the prints wasn't the strangest part. It was where people claimed to find them. According to the most dramatic contemporary reports, trails appeared to approach walls and then continue on the opposite side. Marks were reportedly discovered around enclosed gardens, across courtyards, near locked gates, and even on rooftops. One account described a wall approximately 14 feet high. The trail supposedly approached the obstacle. There were no obvious marks showing an animal climbing around it, but similar impressions were reportedly found continuing beyond it. Other accounts described tracks around haystacks and buildings. In some versions, the trail appeared to stop on one side of an obstruction, only to resume on the other. To residents attempting to follow the tracks, this created an obvious question: what kind of animal could move through the landscape like that? Then there was the Exe Estuary. Reports of similar tracks appeared on both sides of the water. This helped create the claim that whatever had made them had traveled an enormous distance during a single winter night. One correspondent estimated that if all the reported trails were connected, the total journey could have exceeded 100 miles. That figure would become one of the most repeated details of the Devil's Footprint story. But there is a problem. There is no proof that every trail was made by the same animal. In fact, surviving descriptions suggest that not every footprint looked identical. The famous 100-mile journey may therefore have been created by connecting numerous separate sightings into one enormous route. But in February 1855, residents didn't know that. All they knew was that strange tracks had appeared across a large area overnight, and some people were frightened. Reports from the period describe residents becoming increasingly uneasy. In some communities, people reportedly avoided going outside after dark. At Dawlish, a group of men is said to have gone out armed, hoping to find whatever animal was responsible. They found tracks, but they didn't find the creature. No unknown animal was captured. No definitive source of the footprints was discovered. And as newspapers continued discussing the incident, theories began appearing. Some were reasonable, others were considerably stranger. One of the most serious explanations came from Richard Owen, one of Britain's leading anatomists and naturalists. Owen suggested badgers could leave prints that might appear unusual in certain snow conditions. And importantly, there wouldn't need to have been one animal. Multiple badgers moving through different areas could explain why similar tracks appeared across such a large region. But critics pointed to the unusual single-file appearance described in some locations. Others questioned whether badgers could account for tracks apparently continuing across obstacles. Then another possibility emerged. Rats, under certain conditions, a jumping or bounding rodent can place its rear feet close to its front feet as snow melts or collapses around the impression. Separate paw marks can merge into a shape that looks surprisingly like a small hoof. Later correspondence to the Illustrated London News even included illustrations showing how rodent tracks could create misleading impressions in snow. It was plausible, but it didn't convince everyone. Other explanations included hares, otters, birds, polycats, and various combinations of ordinary animals and unusual snow conditions. Then came one of the strangest explanations, a kangaroo. A rumor began circulating that kangaroos had escaped from a private menagerie near Sidmouth. A kangaroo loose in snowy Devon would certainly explain unusual tracks. There was just one problem. There was no convincing evidence that escaped kangaroos were actually responsible. And years later, surviving correspondence revealed something remarkable. Reverend G.M. Musgrave, one of the clergymen associated with the incident, indicated that the kangaroo story had effectively been used to calm people who were becoming convinced that something supernatural was moving through the countryside. In other words, one of the most famous explanations for the mystery may itself have been a story. Because by then, another explanation had already spread among the population: the devil. The marks looked enough like small hoof prints that some residents began referring to them as Satan's tracks. The idea spread quickly. A mysterious visitor had crossed Devon during the night. Walls apparently hadn't stopped it. Locked gardens hadn't stopped it. Water apparently hadn't stopped it, and nobody had seen what made the prints. The supernatural interpretation became so closely connected to the event that the name survived long after the panic disappeared. But decades later, another discovery made the case considerably more interesting. In the 20th century, a collection of documents connected to Reverend Henry Thomas Ellicombe, who had been the vicar of Clest St. George at the time of the incident, came to light. The collection contained correspondence discussing the footprints. More importantly, it contained tracings and drawings. These documents provided something the legend usually leaves out. Not all of the footprints were the same. Some appeared hoof-like. Some showed features resembling claws. Others were less clearly defined. That creates a very different possibility. Perhaps Devon wasn't visited by one mysterious creature at all. Perhaps residents were seeing tracks from several different animals, distorted by unusual snow conditions. Newspapers then connected those separate reports into a single mystery. If that's what happened, there never was one continuous trail. There were many. But that explanation creates another problem. Some of the people investigating the tracks in 1855 weren't simply frightened villagers. Clergymen collected descriptions. Naturalists offered theories. Newspapers received letters from witnesses. People physically followed individual trails. And despite all of that attention, no single explanation was accepted that accounted for every report. More than a century later, researchers examining the original material reached essentially the same difficulty. There are plausible explanations for individual sets of footprints. A badger could explain some. Rodents could explain others. Melting snow could dramatically alter the shape of an ordinary animal track. Exaggeration and newspaper reporting could explain the extraordinary distances. But proving exactly which explanation applies to which trail is now impossible. The snow disappeared. The physical evidence vanished with it. What remains are drawings, letters, newspaper reports, and conflicting eyewitness descriptions. And there is another reason the case survives. Nobody appears to have witnessed the tracks being made. Residents saw the snow before the night. Then, they saw what was left behind the following morning. Whatever happened, happened in darkness. By sunrise, the only evidence was already beginning to melt. There is no photograph of the creature responsible, no preserved footprint, no specimen, and no way to reconstruct every trail with certainty. We can't even be certain that there was one creature to identify. That may be the key to the entire mystery. The devil's footprints are sometimes presented as evidence that something impossible crossed Devon in February 1855. The historical record doesn't prove that, but it does prove something more interesting. Something unusual happened. People across multiple communities reported strange tracks. The national press documented the reports within days. The Illustrated London News published drawings of the impressions. Yeah, naturalists publicly debated their origin, and more than 170 years later, we still cannot reconstruct with certainty exactly what produced every trail. Maybe the answer was never paranormal. Maybe Devon experienced a rare combination of animals, weather, distorted tracks, and 19th century panic. Maybe dozens of unrelated footprints became one enormous story. Or perhaps one of the witnesses really did see something that the ordinary explanations failed to account for. We'll probably never know, because whatever crossed the snow that night, if anything crossed it at all, was gone before anyone thought to look. All that remained were the footprints, and by the time the mystery reached the newspapers, even those were already disappearing. Subscribe to my channel for more mystery cases. See you in the next video.